Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we are here for another poetry discussion, which will appear in two separate playlists here on the channel. Number one being, of course, the poetry discussion playlist, but number two being the Emily Dickinson playlist. Um, Emily Dickinson, of course, being the greatest poet of all time. The fact that we were allegedly in a relationship has no bearing on my opinion. I'm just saying the facts here. Greatest poet of all time. The poem in question today is a short one. This is where I think Emily Dickinson is at her best. When Emily Dickinson is writing short, concise poetry, she is capable of insight that is razor sharp. And that's what we have with this poem. This is the first time this poem has appeared on this channel. And I think part of that is that it's almost part of her wit that is so defiant is that in what I try to do with these videos, with these poetry discussion videos, is I try to break off one little portion of the poem and have something interesting to talk about with it. I try to go in depth on an idea from the poem. When Emily Dickinson is at her best, maybe not her best, I do love her narrative poems. When Emily Dickinson this is almost like Rumi, this poem. This is almost haiku-like, this poem. Probably when Emily Dickinson is at her second best, we'll say. Her poetry is so concise that it's almost impossible to reduce it to something else to expand upon, right? So, for example, when I talk about I died for beauty but was scarce adjusted in the tomb, when one who died for truth was laying in an adjoining room, it's interesting in that poem to pull out the idea of truth. It's interesting in that poem to pull out the idea of beauty. And then further, you can expand on that by pulling out the question, are truth and beauty really the same thing? There's so much nuance within that poem that there's a million places you can go and have hours and hours of conversation about that singular poem. You could have hours of conversation about a single line in that poem, any of the lines in that poem. But here we have 8 lines from Emily Dickinson, and when we get through them, I think you will understand how difficult a poem like this is to deconstruct and then build a scaffolding around. Deconstruct the idea of truth, the idea of beauty, and then build a scaffolding around. Are they the same thing, right? So that's what I mean by the sort of nomenclature there. And because of that, the place where I have to go with this poem is something that does not exist explicitly on the page, but I think it is related to this. I think that it is sort of what you would say is perhaps the moral of the story. The bustle in a house. The bustle in a house the morning after death is solemnest of industries enacted upon earth. The sweeping up the heart and putting love away we shall not want to use again until eternity. Now, obviously, that is wrong. If you were coming in the fall, this is one of those types of ideas that we can just bundle up this love and use it somewhere else, use it at some other time. We can bundle up this love and not need it now. We can bundle up this love and make room in our life for something else. But it is not that way. It does not work that way. But that's not going to stop us from trying. if I can find this page number here. Where am I at? I can't read. Poem 511. So this idea here that we won't want to use this love again until eternity is reminiscent of this poem from Emily Dickinson. If you were coming in the fall, I'd brush the summer by, with half a smile and half a spurn as housewives do, a fly. If you were coming in a year, I'd wind the months in balls, and put them each in separate drawers for fear the numbers fuse. If only centuries delayed, I'd count them on my hand, subtracting till my fingers dropped into Van Diemen's land. If, certain, when this life was out, that yours and mine should be, I'd toss it yonder like a rind, and take eternity. But now, uncertain of the length of this that is between, it goads me like the goblin bee that will not state its sting. I mean, just the audacity, right? To noun love. Make it a noun. It's a thing. This love is just this love. This is it. And I'll put it away for now. But the part that really goads me in this poem is this right here. And putting love away we shall not want to use again until eternity. Why would that be? Why would that be necessary? I don't know that I necessarily believe in love. I don't know that I necessarily believe that it is a real thing. I think it's probably a condition, like a psychological condition, like a mental illness almost. I think that it is a learned behavior. I think that it is something like comfort plus dependence, right? But I'm a romantic. But if there is this part of you which is so dedicated to another person, there is an energy there, right? The energy with which you, I suppose, love this person. What this poem is suggesting is that if that person dies, that piece of you has to be retired. That piece of you has to go ahead and wither away until in some other afterlife type situation and setting, it can once again be exercised and used. That's a shame, right? If there was this part of you which was mysteriously, magically engulfed in another person that people call love, shouldn't that energy be transferred into something else after their passing, not for you, but because of them? One of the ideas that I have shared several times on the channel, we've probably all been here, right? Where you sit down some summer, some winter, some lonely period of life, and you decide, I'm going to go ahead and figure out God, right? For me, during that phase of life, one of the things that perhaps ironically came in instrumental was YouTube. I devoured videos of Christopher Hitchens. I devoured debates between theologians and non-believers alike. And this was sort of in the early YouTube era, the early long form YouTube era, I suppose I should say, maybe 2011, 2012, that type of era, that time period. Um, and independent creators were sort of difficult to find any hold on, right? Like you couldn't hold them. The the idea of subscribing to a channel was still fairly new. YouTube was basically, at least in my opinion, by my observations and practice, YouTube was just those things that go viral. Even the search, I didn't think was particularly useful. It was just the bigger videos on a topic. One of the creators, however, that I had found during that time was someone who was in the midst of losing his religion. And he found, I might get this wrong, and I do not remember this individual's name. This was over a decade ago now. He found a professor of religious history, something like that, I believe at a local community college. And he sort of struck up conversation with this guy and ended up exchanging emails. And it turned out that the professor had been Jewish and still considered himself Jewish, but was also without faith. And one of the things that the professor had explained to him was that in the wake of World War II, in the wake of all of the things that happened under Hitler, a lot of Jewish individuals ended up losing the faith part of their religion. But that's not all a religion is. A religion isn't just faith. Now, a lot of religious folks will tell you that's the part that matters. But it's not the only part that exists. There is a fabric of religion. And especially something like Orthodox Jew, there is a lot of practice in that. There is a lot that they're in embedded in these faiths, the Abrahamic faiths, are a lot of stories that get taken as literal, but we don't know how much literal there is supposed to be in there, because storytelling has always been, we think, one of the ways that people pass along vital lessons, right? So part of this individual's faith, this individual's faith was gone, but he still believed in a lot of the stories, not in their historical accuracy, but in the usefulness of the lessons buried within. The guy who was making the videos didn't really understand. And they went back and forth, and the guy whose channel this was, who had lost his faith, said, "Look, I want to know about the afterlife. Okay, look, because if there's no afterlife, all of a sudden everything is infinitely more terrifying. We have, what, 80 years if we're lucky? I've already lived XYZ of them. At this point, it's terrifying." And the professor of religion had explained to him, well, listen, look at it this way. What does afterlife literally mean? Basically, it means after you're dead. So he explained that the hope that you have for an afterlife is that I have the amount of time that I have. I am going to impact people every day on some scale, positive, negative, good, bad, for a long time, for a short time. What an afterlife would really be to someone who does not believe in heaven, etc., is how long the impact of you survives your corporeal form. So, and one of the ways that this is obvious and prevalent is children. You pass on a bit of you to your children the way that you raise them. But it's not just that. It doesn't stop there. You go to Starbucks once a week. There is a barista who works there for 5 years. That is 150, 250 times you will impact that individual's day. And how are you going to make their life better or worse? What are you going to do to that individual? What will your impact on that individual be? If it's positive, you are having a positive afterlife. If you're the jerk that yells every time your coffee comes out a little too cold, and that individual ends up flinching at work, for the rest of their days, probably not a good deal. That's the bad afterlife. And will weigh your heart, right? To see how many people you have impacted positively versus negatively. And this idea, I think, goes even further. So there's an old phrase saying that you die 2 deaths. You die the last time you take a breath, and you die the second time, the last time anyone uses your name. And that's a pretty good saying, I think. But this idea of the afterlife being how people act, the afterlife being how you have impacted people going forward, is even greater than that. You don't have to have your name said to impact generations. If, for example, you get on the internet and you have some tip or trick that saves people who are having panic attacks, the woo-saw, right? You pass that on online, and 100 people find it, and for the rest of their days they use it. Woo-saw. But they also have a child in high school, and that individual passes the woo-saw onto their child. And their child will never know your name, but you have positively impacted their life. What an interesting idea. What a way to conceptualize the afterlife. Now, why is that interesting to this poem? Why do I bring that up talking about this short and concise Emily Dickinson poem? This poem feels overwhelmingly final. It feels like finality in 8 lines. The bustle in a house the morning after death is solemnest of industries enacted upon earth. The sweeping up the heart and putting love away we shall not want to use again until eternity. Probably that is true, right? Probably there are people who act that way every day. They retire that little bit of them. They retire that little bit of them for the rest of their life. Is that doing the greatest honor to the person who is now gone? Would the person who is now gone want you to retire some bit of your life? And if they would that be an individual worth honoring? I think that's a question that has to be asked as well. But see, putting love away we shall not want to use again does not suggest that it cannot be used again. That's all I have for this poetry discussion. If you like or appreciate what I do here on the channel, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I talk about on this channel, dropping poetry videos every Monday. But also I talk about short stories and novel read-alongs, etc. So as always, I hope to have you back for the next one.